Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove and he is John Gibson. And today we're going to talk about Newcastle United's Lewis Hall. The 20-year-old has had a superb start to the 24-25 campaign, leading to an England call-up for the squad over the next 2 weeks. We're going to look at Hall's rise to the first team and ultimately that England call-up to the senior squad. This episode is brought to you by NORD VPN. You know what to do by now, ladies and gents, to keep yourself safe. Hit that link in our podcast description box to get a special offer on your plan. Thank you to NORD VPN for sponsoring the podcast. Let's get on with the show. John, welcome back. How are you keeping? Are you well?
I'm good. I'm missing the drip of Premier League action, especially when it's positive days these days. But intrigued to wonder what's going to happen with the three Newcastle United players with England over the next few days, because it's a great opportunity. First and foremost, I want them to all stay fit, but I would like to see a couple of the young boys rewarded. It's going to be interesting.
Certainly is. Anthony Gordon and Tino Livramento also joining Lewis Hall in the England squad. But as we said, we're here to talk about Lewis Hall, and it is a well-deserved call-up. We're going to get into Lewis Hall's time on Tyneside and his progression to this point of being in that England squad. But just to start, John, just sum up your feelings about Lewis Hall getting into the senior squad.
Well, it's quite incredible. I think this is football's most romantic story, and I really do mean that. This is a kid who, with 3-year-old, a toddler, walked into St James's Park to begin a love affair with a club, even though he was born and lived in Berkshire, way down in the south. The reason for that was dad and granddad, of course, who were Geordies and passionate Newcastle United fans. Him and his elder brother were both taken on a tour of St James's Park, which so many fans have been on to see what's at the Holy Grail. And there was Lewis, 3-year-old, being indoctrinated into what is Newcastle United. He then went on to sign for Chelsea. He spent something like 10 years of his life there, went through the ranks. Incredibly, his Premier League debut was it Newcastle? Can you imagine that with his love of it and his family's love? Was it Newcastle? We won 1-0, and Dad Colin was in the crowd. I'm certain he didn't know whether to stick or twist because Newcastle had won. Hurrah! His son had lost. Oh dear me! And then it got even more Hollywood, if that was possible. He actually signs for Newcastle United. The lad that's loved Newcastle United from afar suddenly signs for Newcastle United, initially on loan. And that's when the big mystery started, because in the first year his loan period, we hardly saw him, especially at the start. And then when we did see him, he got brought off at half time in some of the games, like Borussia Dortmund and Bournemouth, and he was off at half time. And all the fans are scratching their head and thinking, was he bought by the scouting system and then not assessed by the manager and not seen as up to par? Was he far too attack minded, even for a modern day fullback? He couldn't defend. What was it that was wrong? It turns out to be none of those things, and was brilliantly handled by Eddie, because a policy he has that when young players come to Newcastle, they don't understand the Newcastle way. They're not up physically to strength. They've got to understand the way we press, the way we play. He's done this before. He did it in the first 6 months, if you remember, with Anthony Gordon, who went on to England as a consequence of keeping his level of interest. And he's now doing it with Lloyd Kelly. And he's done it with Hall. It took a little bit longer with Hall. But in the end, he's made it. He's still only 20-year-old. I mean, he's 20-year-old, and this is almost a great comeback before he's even started. The comeback from signing from Newcastle and disappearing, and to suddenly being Newcastle's regular left back and in the England squad at 20-year-old. Now, tell me there's a more romantic story. Tell me there's a bigger Hollywood finish than that. And the boy, it's not the finish of his career, it's the start of his career. He's just starting his career. So there's so much more to come. But it's a wonderful, heartwarming story. Well done, Lewis, for getting your head down during that first year here, learning, sticking in, doing the hard work, not spitting the dummy out, not thinking I'm too good to be treated like this. Well done, Eddie, for persevering, for being insistent that you do it our way or you don't do it at all. You'll learn, you'll react, and he has done. Well done them both, and well done us, because we've got ourselves a left back who we thought we might have got a year ago. We've got him now, and he looked. You know what? I think he's been the most consistent player for Newcastle United this season. We've had players have wonderful games, Andrew. I can think of a couple of games that Anthony Gordon had, a couple of recent games Joe Linton had. Um, Dan Burns had a couple of exceptional games, and then he had the very poor game at Chelsea. But they've been up and down in the Newcastle players. He has been consistent all the way through, and he's looked quite exceptional. And what he's got thoroughly deserved, and he's got a wonderful chance, because the one thing England haven't got is left backs.
Yep, very true. And we'll get on to that in a wee moment. Ladies and gents, that was John briefly summing up. Imagine if I asked him to do chapter and verse, but I can understand his enthusiasm because it is such a fantastic story and it's only just beginning for Lewis Hall. Let's go right back to the start, John. As you mentioned there, Lewis Hall arriving on loan from Chelsea with an obligation to buy at a cost of £28 million. He only made 18 appearances last season, not really impressing, and it wasn't until the final few weeks of the season where he got a sustained run of games, and he was okay, to be fair. But when he first arrived, John, and you heard the news about what he might cost Newcastle United later on, what did you initially think?
Well, I was concerned because, it is a big fee for a left back if the left back ain't going to make it. I mean, it isn't a big fee now when you're facing an England left back, but at the time when he come to Newcastle, he was just what, 18, 19. He was a very, very young man. You thought, wait a minute, because we were committed, if you remember, Andrew, to paying this money. He might have been on loan, but if we couldn't send him back at the end of the loan if he'd met certain criteria, which was always going to be met. It was almost impossible for it not to be met. So we were committed to this money. We hadn't a left back. I mean, we had Dan Burn at 8'6" playing left back, who's essentially a centre half and moves extremely slowly at left back. And there's some flying wingers in the Premier League, and he was keeping Anthony Hall. He was keeping Lewis Hall out the side, and we thought, crikey, what's wrong with Lewis Hall if he's being kept out by a centre half who isn't a left back? And of course, we had seen money, and this might be harsh, but almost wasted on a left back when we'd signed Matt Target, and he's gone into hibernation, and we haven't seen him on the field of place for about a year. So we had got it wrong at left back. We had a fella that physically wasn't built for the position of left back, playing left back. And yet we had this guy that we were committed to 28 million down and rising to 35 million, which is a big fee for a left back that's untested. And we thought, we thought, have we got it wrong again here? We didn't think this because of what we saw, because we didn't see anything. Initially, we didn't see enough of him. Then when we did, he looked to me, Andrew, what he used to be. He looked like a young midfielder, a colt running. Well, you know what a colt? You put the horse out in the field and it runs around the field and it's having a wonderful time and it just goes here, there, and everywhere. He was like that, a little bit indisciplined. Huge talent on the ball. Defensively, people ran off the back of him. Clever players who had experience could exploit that, etc. But he was a young boy learning. And you know what's wonderful? Why I love him to death is that he could have easily buckled. There was a long time of hibernation, a full season at Newcastle, and he never said anything because he wasn't in a position and the club didn't put him forward to saying anything. Eddie Howe said next to nothing. He said the odd thing, oh, he's progressing, he's learning his trade, etc., etc. But that was all. And we were just thinking, is this not going to work out? And it has worked out superbly well. And while a lot of credit has got to go to Eddie Howe and his coaching staff, there's also a lot of credit go to the boy. He's a young lad, and he wasn't a Geordie. He was used to living in Berkshire. He'd come to the other end of the country and had to live a life when he was just a boy on his own at this end of the country and not getting the adulation that perhaps he might have first expected. And he had to have the courage and the dedication and the willingness to learn, to live through all that. And he's shown tremendous dedication. We've seen players in the past at Newcastle have buckled or spit the dummy out in situations like that. He didn't, and good on him. And that's why he's sitting where he is as we talk. And that is with the full England squad aboard.
Yep, very, very true. I think it's fair to say that Newcastle have lacked a real quality left back for many, many years. But at the time that Lewis Hall arrived, I don't think many people felt Hall was the answer. I mean, I'll be honest with you, when he signed for Newcastle United, I had no idea who he was. You know, I know he'd played 12 times for Chelsea, but I wasn't aware of him. And then when you see the figure, you think, goodness me, that's a lot of money. And at the time, you know, I think Robinson from Fulham had been linked and looked at. You know, there was talk about Hernandez from AC Milan, you know, quality, proven left backs that Newcastle United were reportedly in for. And then they signed this chap who I'm guessing many of our listeners and viewers, if they're really honest with themselves, probably weren't too aware of him. But he's proved everybody wrong. You mentioned there, John, Dan Burn was the man who played the majority of left back last season. But at times he was getting turned inside out, and there were plenty of calls to bring Lewis Hall in through various months of last season. But how stuck to his plan kept him out of the first team until very late on, and just wanted to work with him behind the scenes on the training pitch. Now, John, looks like an absolute genius move, doesn't it?
Oh, wonderful. I mean, if you remember as well, when he got the odd start, I think in 3 of them he was off by half time, and that's the ultimate humiliation for a footballer to be subbed at half time when he's not injured, because it's so early. It's almost like saying to him, once he got back in the dressing room, "You've been so awful, my lad." I'm not talking about all, I'm talking about any footballer. "You've been so awful, my lad, that you're not going on for the second half because we want to win this game." So that is a lot to put up with. What he had all the time and what I clung on to was the fact that he was so comfortable on the ball. He looked as if he'd been brought up a midfielder, and he had at Chelsea, and sort of converted to left back. But defensive work was very poor. If you remember, there was some criticism, and I mean, with hindsight now, a lot of fans will probably deny all this because you don't want to say, "Yes, I felt like that." You want to say, "I always saw these guys as a genius." But Newcastle weren't having good transfer windows recently, having had magnificent transfer windows from the takeover. And there was some thought that money had been wasted buying 2 fullbacks who were patently not going to go straight in the team, Livramento and Hall. So they're saying, why do you spend, the thick end of 100 million on 2 fullbacks who are for the future, who are going to sit a lot of the time on the subs bench, and you haven't bought a centre forward or a centre half or a midfielder or whatever. You haven't bought for a more immediate situation. You haven't bought for the Newcastle United team today, the team that's entering into the Champions League and could do with new bodies. We haven't bought there apart from Tonali. And so there was a feeling, why are we buying for tomorrow when there's such a necessity today? And of course, what have we got now? We've got 2 of the brightest fullbacks in the Premier League, and both of them still Baines, by the way. Let us not forget Livramento and Hall are still Baines. But they're in the full England squad, albeit they're waiting for their first cap, but they're in the full England squad. And that shows the potential of those 2 players. And it has proved that it was a risk worth taking. A risk worth taking because it didn't improve the side immediately, but it's often improved the side a year on.
No, it certainly has, and you are right. There was a lot of people who questioned those deals initially, and rightly, you know, you could understand because Newcastle United needed impact players, and a lot of people were thinking that these 2 were players for the future. But here we are with them both in the England squad, and performing really well for Newcastle United. I mean, you look back at Lewis Hall last season, John. He featured in the 3rd and 4th round of the League Cup. He came off the bench for a few moments against Sheffield United in that 8-0 victory. that Newcastle secured in the September of last year. And then he ended up playing against Dortmund from the off. And I think a lot of people looked at that and thought that was a bit of a strange move. Champions League, Dortmund away, and then he was off at half time. It didn't go very well for him. And it was kind of like Eddie Howe bedding him in and then all of a sudden taking 4 or 5 steps forward and then saying, all right, here you go. Because, I mean, that was a really tough game for him to be thrown into. But it's all about experience, I guess. And look, as difficult as it was to come off in a game like that, he probably looks back on those experiences as something that's really tailored him to where he is now.
Yes, I think at the time, if he's honest with himself, and I think he is a very, very honest lad, he would be frustrated as heck last season. He would be frustrated because he wasn't getting early opportunities, and then when he did, he was brought off at half time. I mean, the Dortmund thing was staggering, wasn't it? It was staggering he started, and it was staggering he was brought off as early as half time. So there was two things. But he was learning. There wasn't a lot of explanation publicly from Eddie, and that's Eddie's style. I think he gives away as little as he possibly can in public in terms of not explaining exactly what's happening. And that's fine because, well done, Eddie. You've got 99% of the things you've done at Newcastle United right, and we're totally grateful to you for that. And if that's your way of carry on with it because it's working. But I mean, the one thing that probably give Lewis heart and would probably be loved by his dad and his granddad last season, I'm talking about, would be playing at Manchester United in the League Cup. He scored, didn't he? And Newcastle won 3-0. I mean, that would be a highlight, but there wasn't many highlights, so that one would stand out for him. But you looked at him and you thought, he looks, if it's not a little boy lost, he looks like a little boy that's been put on the field. You know, when you see a school match and little lads run all over the place rather than hold a position, because it's a wild enthusiasm and they chase the ball. There's times when he looked like that. He always showed an ability on the ball. He's got a wonderful left foot. He's got vision. He could pick out a pass. He was always willing to fly forward, etc., etc. Defensively, he was vulnerable, and there's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt he's learned from that. I mean, you think about him now. Look at the quality wingers that he's played against. I mean, look at the kid he had at Nottingham Forest. Look at his best game when he played Saka, who's picked for England and is England's regular outside right when fit, and he put him in his back pocket when Arsenal came up here. He's played quality, where once upon a time he would have got his backside taken out. And in fairness, that Dan Burn of last season, with his lack of pace playing left back, was destroyed by flying wingers like those, wasn't he? And this guy wasn't. This guy's got the pace to be able to match them in a foot race, but he's also got the intelligence now to jockey and when to put his foot in, when to try to win the ball, when to hold off. And of course, once he's got it, lending support on the overlap is terrific, as Livramento does on the other side. And he looks a different player. I mean, he was so boyish looking anyway, wasn't he? When he played last season, he looks as if he'd just come from choir practice. And you thought, he was fresh-faced, boyish-looking boy, and you thought, shouldn't he be playing for the under-18s or something, and not the Newcastle United first team? And all of a sudden now, there's a bit of maturity there, and he is looking the player that obviously the scout that scouted him, whoever that was, saw down at Chelsea, and I believe Chelsea saw it. And you've got to remember that his debut was given by Thomas Tuchel, that Graham Potter gave him his Premier League debut at Newcastle, that they didn't want to get rid of him, but in the way that we were forced to get rid of Anderson because we needed financial fair play, they are forced to get rid of their academy players because they make the biggest profit. And therefore, Lewis Hall had to be sold. And I think Newcastle looked at it and thought, if we don't get him now, we don't get him at all, because somebody else will get him. And the opportunity, ideally, they probably would have liked to have signed him this season, not last season. but they had to take him when the opportunity was there or lose him. And they gambled on taking him and it turning out right. And it has done, and may I say, spectacularly so.
Yeah, most definitely. I don't think anyone would argue with you. Last season, he started the last 6 games of the campaign, probably a little bit ahead of time, I think, for Eddie Howe, but he did play. He looked okay. Didn't look like he was a star or anything, but didn't necessarily do anything wrong. I think you could probably look at him and see he wasn't quite ready for it. You know, there was a few moments, and that also went into the start of this season where defensively he was maybe caught out a little bit, especially with the ball over the top and when he was being run at. But again, a really important introduction to first team football to get those 6 games under his belt. And it's funny, isn't it, John? Because we're talking about Lewis Hall as he is, a 19-year-old, now 20-year-old footballer. But maybe we are guilty sometimes of forgetting that he actually played quite a bit of first team football for Chelsea, which when you look at how Howe approached Hall, you know, that's maybe forgotten because Howe treats him as maybe someone who hadn't had first team experience and obviously saw that he wasn't ready for a consistent run of games. But those games at Chelsea, the 12 games he did play, that also would have provided a very important foundation for what we see now.
Yeah, he got their man of the match at Newcastle when they lost 1-0. He got the Chelsea man of the match. And I think a couple of games later, he got another man of the match at Chelsea. Yes, I mean, there was always something there. But Newcastle are a different club under Eddie Howe to most other clubs. I mean, he had 12 games at Chelsea, and we forget that because he was so young, and that was a good return for his age. He was playing for England at the age group levels, and we think, well, he was still not seen by Eddie as right. But if you look at Anthony Gordon, a young man, he joined us from Everton, where he'd been a first team regular at Everton. In his first 6 months here, he came in January, and for the rest of that season, he was in and out of the first team. Remember, there was a fleeting show of tantrum when he was pulled off by Eddie in one game and didn't like it and learned very quickly you don't do that with Eddie and never did it again. And he was brought off, and people were then saying, not necessarily Newcastle fans, but other people, oh, you know, has he been hyped over what he really is and what is he going to be? Comes out in the second season and he has the impact that Hall's having now and was absolutely sensational and ends up being an England international. But when you sign for Newcastle, the way Eddie plays, the high press, the way he prefers to play, the high press, supremely fit, because you've got to go up and down, up and down, up and down for 90 minutes. And in ordinary fitness is often not a good enough fitness for the way Eddie Howe teams play. So you've got to get up to that standard. I think perhaps Lloyd Kelly is going through that quietly at the moment. New signing, not automatic in the team. Anthony Gordon, new signing, not automatic in the team. Same with Livramento and Hall, not automatic. That was more understandable because they were kids. But it even worked with Gordon, and I think it's happening with Kelly. It's the way it is. You get the exception. You get the player who's got it all and can do it, and whether that's Botman or whether it's Bruno or whether it's Trips when he first come. But if you're slightly inexperienced, if you're slightly young, if you're perhaps not as physically 100% in Eddie's eyes, where you might be 100% for Everton, or you might be 100% for Chelsea, but you're not 100% for the way we play, which is different and is physically different. Then you get up to that before you're released into the side. And that can be frustrating for the players and can also put a few things in the minds of fans looking, saying, is this fella a bit of a duckhead? Is he worth? Is Anthony Gordon worth the money that we paid? Is Hall worth the money? I mean, now with hindsight, everybody would laugh at that and say Gordon's worth twice as much than Hall will be. But we weren't saying that on first looking at these guys.
No, not at all. And it's interesting you mentioned Anthony Gordon because because Eddie Howe, sorry, is talked about Lewis Hall's call up to the England squad, and he's referenced Anthony Gordon in his comments about Hall as well. So I'll just read you out these quotes, John, and then you can dive in and tell me what you think of them. So Howe said, patience is something you need. And I know that as a father, when you're with your kids and whatever you're trying to help them with, whether it's maths or whatever subject or part of their life, you can get frustrated and impatient with their development. You need to sometimes just be calm and let them develop in their own way. We always try to push the players and try to help them. And Lewis is a really good case in point for us now to point to in the future. It was the same with Anthony. You go through a period with every player and you can never look at one case and go, that's how long it will take you. It's all unique to the individual. But Lewis really committed to the work and now he's reaping the rewards. I mean, is there anything that stands out there for you about what Eddie Howe said?
Yeah, just that this is Eddie Howe's way. We've seen that there are rewards at the end of it. It baffled fans at the start because there's not that much explanation comes out in Newcastle. It just happens, and that's fine. That's fine. It just happens. So you think, oh, what's going on here? Why is this guy not in regularly? Why doesn't he look good? But I think it happens, and it's not for the first time with Hall, and it won't be for the last time. I think it's happening with Lloyd Kelly, as I said, and we'll see. Maybe by the end of the season, Kelly will be a quality player. He showed it in his last League Cup tie that why he was signed, and we've got to hope that that way of treating youngsters. And with young players like Hall, who was the youngest of the lot, younger than Gordon, it takes that little bit longer in the development. Isn't that the path we hope Asula's going to go down? Isn't that why he's been bought? In a year's time, will he look a different player to what he looks now? I would suggest he probably will.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And Eddie Howe makes the point there that Lewis Hall is the one to point to about how this progression works and why, yes, you've got to be patient, but look at Lewis Hall now, look at Anthony Gordon now. So I'm sure if William Asula has behind closed doors got maybe a little bit frustrated, and that's understandable, because the players want to play, that someone's gone, we're there. Look what we did with Lewis, look what we did with Anthony, and look at them now playing for their country. So just trust the process. It's that old phrase, isn't it, that we always used to say with the takeover, just trust the process and it'll be all right. But definitely, I think Sula will be looking at Hall and saying, yeah, look, I can follow that path and make it not only here, but also playing for my country. And, Hall's spoken, John, about his time away from the first team. And he said, I wasn't at the level that I could have been in training. It took me a while to adapt to Howe's training, but I'm grateful for everything now. With me not playing, I can understand fans naturally wondered what was going on. I mean, first off, it's kind of refreshing to hear someone talk so openly and honest about it. He said, look, it's not really something to do with the manager in many ways. Yes, it's him setting the standards, but the first most important thing was that I wasn't at the levels I could have been. I hold my hands up. I knew it had to be fixed. The managers helped me, and here we are now reaping the rewards.
Yeah, yeah. It's much easier to do that when you've come out the other end and you are a star, of course, than it is for, say, a Sula or somebody to do it now. I mean, bless him. I bet at the time, and it was best that he was kept out the public eye and he didn't say anything and he wasn't put up in front of the press or etc. But I bet he had frustrating days where if he wasn't bouncing his head off the wall, he was wanting to smash the door down of the manager or someone else and saying, what's going on? I'm being ignored here. I bet there was difficult days. There always is in football. It is the way of the world, and he's come out the other end. And we've got to realise, I mean, I've just been saying he had the comeback before he'd been anywhere. This is the comeback at Newcastle United after how he started at Newcastle. He's had a comeback and he hasn't been anywhere yet. And look at what's in future. He's only 20-year old, for goodness sake. I mean, and when you think that he is best still, his biggest assets going forward, an eye for a pass, or the minute he breaks up an opposition attack, he can get rid of the ball to somebody in space so quickly. He's got a wonderful eye. You ask him who his heroes are, and he says Kevin De Bruyne and Hatem Ben Arfa. Well, they're not defenders, by the way. They're attackers. And that's because he loves to attack. And that's not a criticism of him. I'm giving him a plus here. because he has that ability to attack. Like Adam Ben Arthur, we know all about. He was our wonderful winger that everybody adored and then everybody was frustrated by. And De Bruyne, everybody knows, and he began at Chelsea, of course. But his heroes were attackers, and that is what he's got the strength of. But I think I said this on a podcast we did, yeah, probably about a year ago, probably when they actually signed. But that I believe that Livramento and Lewis Hall can become the Craig and Clark of the modern day. That the greatest full-back pairing we had, who won things, by the way, unlike anything we've done since. They won the European Fairs Cup, they won the Anglo-Italian Cup in Florence in front of 45,000 Italians, and David Craig scored the winning goal. They won things, and Craig played 435 times for Newcastle, Clark 487. And that was my era. I saw them play the vast majority of all those games. And they were quality fullbacks. These two, because the birth certificate is in their favour, they're both Bens. They can stay as long and rack up as many games as Craig and Clark. They can do it in tandem and they can become Newcastle legends as long as they stay at the club and they're lucky enough with injuries. And isn't that a comforting thing to say? When you think when they came, it was Trippier had right back nailed down, and that was the end of that. And Byrne was playing left back, and so you thought here's two reserves. And a year later, Trippier is out the picture. He's 34 and could be sold in January or go at the end of the season on a free. And Byrne's back in the position he ought to be in. And Kelly has seen one route to the team, i.e., left back, cut off by the form of Hall, where he might have felt that that was a position he could get in the team.
Yeah, I mean, for you just to mention Hall and Livramento in the same breath as Craig and Clark is a fantastic compliment right now. But if they got anywhere near
Yes.
those two, it would be some achievement, wouldn't it? But you mentioned there, John, Lloyd Kelly, and really interesting because in the summer we saw obviously Lewis Hall become permanent. Then we saw Lloyd Kelly sign on a free transfer, and there was lots of excitement about that. And I'm still very excited about his arrival because I think he's going to be a top player. But it was a battle between Kelly and Hall for that left back spot. Hall started against Southampton, but he struggled somewhat. Kelly came in, started against Bournemouth, Spurs, and Fulham. Hall started against Wolves, which was before that Fulham game. But it's fair to say that at that point in time, it hadn't looked like Eddie Howe had made his decision. So I think Lewis Hall would have been a little bit nervous about his position, don't you?
Of course, because Kelly is a quality player. He's still got to find his feet here, but he's a quality player. And it goes without saying that Eddie Howe's got faith in him because Eddie Howe signed him for Bournemouth. So if Eddie Howe's going to sanction going back from him, it's not because he's a free transfer. It's because he thinks that this fella's a quality player that can enhance my squad. Now that means either the left centre half starts panicking or the left back starts panicking because that's Kelly's positions. Now Kelly did well at centre half for me the last time we saw him. I think it was in the League Cup at St James's, wasn't it? And I'm certain that he will play left-sided centre half with Hall outside him in the next game against West Ham because Burns suspended and Kraft's injured, who could have come in and moved Shaw to left side. But now it looks obvious that it's going to be Kelly. And I think Kelly will be knocking on this door by the end of the season in the same way as other young lads have taken that time because he has got quality and he has got pace, which our centre halves haven't got, by the way, neither Shaw nor Byrne, and Byrne's obvious, but it's the one thing that Shaw lacks is pace. Kelly has got that. But yes, Kelly was in for that position. And left back has been a heck of a problem for us. Where when we had Frankie Clark, it wasn't, but we've tried to solve it with Target. We've tried to solve it with Byrne. We've tried everything we can think of, and it hasn't worked. We had Kelly, who might have been the man to solve it, and suddenly here comes Hall out the woodwork. And you know what's wonderful for Manu? what's wonderful for him is at club level and country level, he's only 20, but he hasn't got a huge amount of opposition for his position. Newcastle haven't got an out and out left back who only plays left back and is knocking on the door and saying, "Get out the way, Lewis, I'm the left back for this club." England, similarly, since Luke Shaw become as injury prone as Callum Wilson has, since Ben Chilwell it went out of favour at Chelsea, they haven't got a recognised left back. If you remember during the Euros, Kieran Trippier played left back throughout the Euros because Shaw was injured right till the last game when Shaw was brought back up. So we haven't got a left back. And all of a sudden, he gets his call early because we haven't got a left back. I'm not saying he isn't good enough. He is good enough. But the reason he's got his call so early is because we haven't got a left back. And therefore, I would think over the two games England have got in this international fortnight, which is away to Greece on Thursday and at home to the Republic of Ireland on Sunday, I would expect Lewis Hall to get his first cap. Whether it's starting in one of those two games or whether it's coming on as a sub, I would expect him to come back to Newcastle to play against West Ham as a full England international. And the interesting thing, is that while he's away, Andrew, with England, who's one of the England coaches? The best left back England's ever had, Ashley Cole, 107 caps for England as a left back. He's on Carsley's coaching squad, and he fleetingly coached Hall at Chelsea. Just fleetingly, I think Lampard brought Ashley Cole in to do some coaching down there, so he knows Hall and his work with Hall. And by the way, is there a better left back to tell Hall how to play left back than Ashley Cole? I don't think so. I don't mean that the biggest influence is the Mad Dog and Howe, but a little input from Ashley Cole in the year, which is not contradicting anything Howe's doing, but supplementing it, that can only be an advantage.
But yeah, it was difficult, I think, for Hall at the start of the season. I remember Newcastle United legend John Anderson having a little bit of a deserved criticism at Hall's defending ability. And since then, really since the Man City game, because that's when he came into the side, and since then he started 6 games for Newcastle United and played 90 minutes throughout, but for I think he came off in the 89th minute in one of those games in the league. He's been absolutely superb. And what we've seen is a really quick progression because Ando was not wrong. He knows what it takes to be a top-level footballer. He knows how to defend. He played goodness know how many games at Newcastle United over 10 years. So he knows what he's talking about. And since that criticism, since that Man City game, we've just seen Hall turn it around. And all the deserved criticism about his defensive ability has seemingly gone for now. He's got to keep doing it. It's about consistency. But certainly he looks more assured. He looks more focused when he needs to defend. And I'm all for that. It's been a quick turnaround, and I'm a little bit surprised by how quick it has come. But he's looking much better now when he's called upon defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to Ando an awful lot because not only is he in the press box, but I do all pre-match stuff in a pub in Newcastle. I do it with Ando. And I talked to Ando a lot about Hall, and Ando was a top fullback, and he does know what's needed defensively, and he was very unsure. I remember talking a lot. I'm going back to last season and early this season. I remember talking a lot to Supermac about Hall, and he was equally unconvinced about him defensively, not on the ball. And if we remember, and a lot of younger people won't, Supermac started out as a left back at Tunbridge and signed for Fulham when Bobby Robson was the manager of Fulham as a left back before he was converted to a centre forward. So he knows the position as well as Ando. And both were unconvinced by Hall as the defensive part, not the attacking part. And I can understand that because you could see it when you were watching him. You could see him switch off and the ball go over the top of him and a lightning winger pinging off his shoulder and Newcastle were in trouble. You could see what they were about. But that only gives even more credit to what Lewis Hall is today, because the transformation, as you said, Andrew, has been so startling in its quickness that's what it's almost like. In some ways, it isn't quick, Andrew, because he's learned from the day he come here, which is well over a year ago to now. But the penny seems to have dropped eventually. He's got fitter, he's got quicker, he's started using his intelligence. He's not just thought of scampering forward and being Hatton Ben Arthur or De Bruyne. He's thought about actually being able to defend as well. And the penny has dropped, and he's suddenly looking in all round much better player. He'll have a bad game. He's bound to, whether that's with Newcastle United or it's with England. He's bound to. He's 20. He's gonna have a few ups and downs, but he's on the right path. Livramento on the other side will get caught out on occasions because he's a young lad, but you can see the quality oozing out of the pair of them, and that's wonderful to see. And I don't take comparisons with Craig and Clark very lightly, because they were my two fullbacks when Newcastle were winning in Europe, and are still to this day two very dear friends of mine. So I compare higher compliment to Livramento and Hall and say in tandem they can become Craig and Clark.
Yep, indeed. And yeah, I think we just got to kind of praise Hall for getting his head down. It would have been a test of character, as you say, John, last season, not to spit his dummy out and not to kind of maybe even anger Eddie Howe by his attitude. He's clearly got the right attitude. That's been proven by how he worked last season. Then he's come into this season and had to work really hard as well, not just to battle Lloyd Kelly for that position, but also work on his own game, as we've just described there. So he just seems to have the right attitude, very hard work, and it's absolutely fantastic to see him. I mentioned that Man City game. Every single week, we seem to be saying, "Oh, man of the match performance, man of the match performance." Those 6 games, he's just gotten better every single week. And for me, that Arsenal game was so important because he was up against one of the Premier League's best wingers, and then against Nottingham Forest as well. In form, Nottingham Forest. Elanga, he's been in great form. And I mentioned this on Tuesday's show with Simon Bird. If you watch how they defended against Elanga, it was really, really important to keep him from putting the balls in the box to Chris Wood. And Lewis Hall, Joe Linton, and Joe Willock working together as a trio around Elanga to stop the ball in the box. And that's another side of his game. It's not just about him. He's obviously listened to the instruction. He's working with his teammates. He's 20 years of age. He's got so much more to learn, much further to go. But right now, is there a better left back in the Premier League than Lewis Hall? I don't think there is.
There isn't a better English left back, that's for certain. And it is all about teamwork. I mean, I felt before the game against Arsenal and afterwards the game against Forest, there would be won or lost by Newcastle fullbacks, because Arsenal had Saka and Martinelli up against Livramento and Hall, and then they handle that terrifically. But you go straight into Ilanga and Hudson-Odoi. And that is a huge test again, because the 2 wide men have made Arsenal and the 2 wide men have made Forest. And so exactly the same test was on again and was passed with flying colours. But how has Newcastle doing is it's a tandem, isn't it? The left side, you get Hall, you get Willock, and you get Joe Linton. Now, that might be great going forward, but it's also good defensively, because Willock and Joe Linton will run the other way, will support, and will not leave you exposed. And if you remember, it used to always be like that when the takeover first happened on the right-hand side, when you had Trippier and you had Miggy up top. He would always run backwards, wouldn't he? He would always run backwards and help out and if Trips went forward, he would tuck in behind, because he was willing to do his defensive work. We had that on the right, but we had an imbalance on the left in those days, because Byrne wasn't going to attack in the same way, etc., etc. So it was different. And Gordon, when he plays outside left, will come back We'll come back. And all the great sides had that. You look at Manchester United and they had Gary Neville and great fullbacks, etc., etc. And they had two of the best wide men that's possible to have in Giggs and Beckham. But they were great attackers and they're remembered for that. But they ran backwards. They ran the other way as well. You ask anybody in that team, they say, hey, people forget, they just see them going that way, but they ran back. They did the work up and down. That's why they played as many games as they did, and that's why Manchester United was successful as all. Newcastle do that in tandem now. Don't leave Livramento and Hall exposed or any other fullback. You're not covering them because they're young. You're covering because what's football? A team game. It's not a game of individuals, it's a team game. And that's what Newcastle do well. And that's what Howe wants them to do well. And sometimes that colours team selection. You think, why has he picked him and him? But sometimes it's because the work they do off the ball as well as the work they do on the ball to help that left flank be strong, because it used to be a weak flank for us. It's no longer that.
No, certainly so, and it's great to see that Hall's defensive capabilities are now matching those of his attacking ones, because he's superb on the ball, great pass of the ball. We've seen he can also strike towards goal as well, so hopefully he can add a few more goals to his game. But what a tremendous last kind of 6-7 weeks he's had at left back for Newcastle United. We wish him well in the England squad, hopefully playing Greece this evening. He might meet Vlachodimos, and maybe he'll open his England scoring as well. I just want to finish on this comment, John, that I've been sent in. That's been sent in by one of our listeners. I asked people on social media their thoughts on Lewis Hall and whether they've been surprised at how quickly he's risen to the England squad and risen to be first choice left back in Newcastle. And someone's written in and said, massively surprised. He obviously isn't a natural left back, but he's starting to turn into one. Credit to him and the coaching staff for all the hard work. And I think that nicely sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's no question about that. Everybody concerned needs plaudits. The manager for sticking with it and not for losing his head and trying to justify the fee and throw him in and the team gets exposed. The kid, because he's a kid and he's shown enough about him, bearing in mind, we forget because of his Geordie links and his dad and his granddad, he's not from up here. He hasn't returned home, which is a wonderful thing for anybody to do. It was like a move to another club at the other end of the country, and that's exactly what it was. And he was a band when he was moving. He wasn't moving with a family and kids and making life comfortable when he was away from the training ground. It was tough for him, and he kept his head down, and he could have sunk. He could have easily have just disappeared, and we saw him as much as we see a few other players, and that hasn't happened, and it's been terrific. And now the one thing people would say is, for goodness sake, Lewis, keep your head, keep your feet on the ground. Don't think you've got it made with a Premier League club at Newcastle. You're their regular left back, and you must be their regular left back because you're in the England squad. And now I'm in the England squad. I'll not be moved out of it. I'll be in it for the next 10 years. Don't think that, because that's when it doesn't happen. But you know what? He won't think that, because anytime he starts thinking that, he'll remember the last 12 months when he was on loan and think, hey, do I want to go back to that? There's no way. He's proved in that 12 months that he won't get carried away, because every time he has a little off day or doesn't play as well, or he thinks, let me swagger down the big market or whatever, he'll think, hey, up. It was only flipping a few months back where I was unheard of. Nobody knew me. I wasn't getting anywhere with Newcastle. Fans were openly wondering about me, and there was no answer to it. There was no public answer to it. He's had to do it. It's happened quickly. But the reason he'll keep his feet on the ground is because that experience is too recent and would be too frustrating from to suddenly showboat. And he'll not become Hatton Ben Arthur, who he loved. And perhaps he wanted to become Hatton Ben Arthur, but he won't, because that guy, it could have been anything and wasn't. This fella could be anything, but I think will be.
Fantastic stuff. Well, fingers crossed he can achieve everything and more at Newcastle United. And with him being so young, he's got the world really in his hands. We look forward, hopefully, to seeing him play for England in the next 2 games. Then he comes back fit and ready for that game against West Ham up at St James's Park. I've been Andrew Musgrove. He's been John Gibson. This has been Let's Talk About Lewis Hall. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Get into the comments, hit the thumbs up button, leave us a rating and review. Click that link for your NORD VPN subscription. It is an offer you do not want to miss out on. Trust me, it is well worth your monthly subscription. And for myself and John, we'll see you guys next week.